Hello, welcome to the American Revolution. But before we get to the American Revolution, we got that French and Indian War thing in the way. Here they called it the French and Indian War because, the English are fighting the French and the Indian. Over in Europe, it's called the Seven Years' War. And everything you know about the Seven Years' War is wrong. 7 Years' War is 1756 to 1763, actually starts in 1754 near Pittsburgh. Instead of the wars happening in Europe and spreading to North America, this one's backwards. It starts in North America and spreads to Europe. In 1754, right here, we got the problem. The English are pushing into the west. The French, of course, own it. There's a problem. And the problem starts in Pittsburgh because that's where the three rivers come together: Monongahela, the Ohio, and, of course, the Allegheny. Good trading post. Going to put it right there at Point Park. Well, they sent a Virginia militiaman, some guy named George, what's his name again? Washington. Yeah, that guy. Write it down because you probably won't see it again. They evict the French and everything goes wrong. The following year, they send British regulars with Braddock, and they get ambushed in the woods, and they're saved by that George Washington guy because he's been through this already. And in 1756, the war is really on. Now, last time I talked about the French and Indian War slash 7 Years' War, which spread across the entire globe: North America, Europe, India, even Africa and the Philippines and Havana. I spent an hour and a half on it. I went kind of bonkers, so we're just not going to do that this time. All right, so to make a long story short, American colonists, being loyal British subjects, are fighting alongside British soldiers here in North America, and in the end, France is going to lose and lose big. See this big blue thing that belongs to France? Well, it's not there anymore. So the British take the whole thing from France. They let them keep Haiti. All of Cuba, all of Quebec now belongs to the British. They made a deal with the Quebecers. Remain loyal. We won't mess with the Catholic Church. You can still speak French, so you got to learn to speak a little bit of English. And at the last second, the French give the Spanish this whole thing here called Louisiana. They'll get it back in 1800 with a secret treaty that wasn't a secret very long. So the British also took this away from the Spanish. They took Florida because Spain took France's side and lost. So at the end of the day, the British win big in the 7 Years' War slash French and Indian War. Now, during the war, it didn't start off that great. They were losing pretty bad in the beginning, and this Ben Franklin guy came up with an idea called the Albany Plan of Union because the response to the French wasn't very good. I mean, individual colonies were trying their own thing. Then the British finally took over the war effort and united everybody, and they went on to victory because it's a military thing. People didn't mind so much about having the British run the whole thing. And he proposed, Ben Franklin, a plan of union for the colonies because if you don't, operate as one, they're going to pick you off one by one, hence join or die. Well, it was a complete failure. Now, the British, they win the war, but, wars cost a lot of money. Oh my God, how much money? 132 million pounds in debt. They were already 72 million in the hole. Now it's 132. Interest on this thing is 4 million pounds a year. Well, they need some money. They need some fast. Total colonial debt's only 2 million. So the only way a government really raises money is going to be through taxes, and nobody likes to pay increased taxes. 40% of British trade is with America, so that's where they start looking, and they pull out the magnifying glass. How much money can we get off the trade going to America? Before all that happens, though, we've got a revolt that breaks loose over in the West called Pontiac's Rebellion. A guy named Nealon was in it, but, Pontiac got all the credit. The minute the 7 Years' War ends, a lot of Indian allies who had been promised their own land by the British, in exchange for aid against the French, go on a revolt because they're terrified that the British are now just going to open up the whole West to settlers. Remember, they can't play the French and British off against each other anymore because now the French are out of the game. Iroquois, the ones who know this first, but so do other people. So there's a lot of revolts all over the place in the West. The British had just got through fighting with the French over here in that 7 Years' War. That was really 9 years. And they're not really up for another war, especially out in the middle of nowhere. So guess what? There's India's Pontiac's Rebellion. You see, fighting out here in the woods. This guy running off with a sword, but he's headed for the pawn shop. As you can tell, they're not very good at storming fortified positions. They could wait it out, wait for them to starve. Or, we just come up with a settlement. Oh my God, the Indians win a war. How about that? The Indians always lose, not this time. So the British make a deal. Everything west of the Appalachians is going to be one big Indian reserve. We're not going to let any settlers in there. No more settlers are allowed to go in there. So that makes the Native Americans very happy. Makes the colonists very upset. Because what was the point of coming to America if I just can't keep expanding? Because more people are coming in and it's starting to get crowded in the east. And if it gets crowded, you just move west, right? Got to scramble your way past the Appalachians. Usually do Pittsburgh, take the Ohio River in because, the Appalachians are solid. And now the British are trying to keep American settlers from going west. Isn't that what we fought the French for? Yeah, so that we can go west. So now instead of French keeping us out, we have our own British soldiers keeping us out. And they need about 10,000 soldiers on the frontier, and that's about, 50,000 pounds, which is 6% of Britain's military budget. Hey, weren't you running a debt anyway? Now you're slapping another 500,000 on top of this? And it's not exactly helping relations between the British and the colonies. Right? They were getting along fine. Now you tell me I can't go west after fighting a war, go west. The guy in charge at the time is King George. Uh, Fortunately, he's moved on there from the pantyhose thing. We got just straight ahead pants. But he is in charge of Great Britain at the time. And, I'm not saying he has dictatorial tendencies, but he really does need somehow to find some money to pay off the debt. And the place for that debt will probably be the colonies. This is an 18th century search warrant. They call it writs of assistance. If they send a royal official over to look for money or look for goods or check for smugglers, he waves his writ of assistance around and you are required to assist him in any way he needs. This is something that's been around a long time, but you didn't really see it until 1765. You're going to see what happens in just a second, why this is important. All right, now the British view of the 7-Year War and the American view of the 7 Years' War. The British say we fought in the 7 Years' War. The Americans say, yeah, we know, we were there. All right, we fought alongside you. All right. British said we had to pay for this war. The Americans said, yeah, you said you were going to pay for it, so there's that, right? The British say we fought this war on your behalf. The Americans are going to say, yeah, we fought for Great Britain because we're British too, and if you fought for our behalf, why are you not letting us go to the West? And the British reply, you are British. The land beyond the Appalachians, not the Apps, the Appalachians are British. You obey British law. American colonists is like, we fought for that land beyond the Appalachians. We have a lot of people here and they're piling up, so it's time to go west. That's why you came here. So do you see the problem between the British view of the war and the American view of the war? Yep, you're also starting to see a dividing line here, British and American. Didn't quite see that so much last time. And now here come the taxes. Now we're upset. You won't let us go west. And now we've got taxes coming up. The Navigation Acts have been around since the 1660s. Nobody worried so much about that because, it was in the background. It was always kind of there. English importers had to pay taxes on colonial goods coming to Great Britain. Nobody thought twice about that. So what? Only brought in 1,800 pounds by the end of the war. And how much they got to pay back? The exact answer is 132 million pounds. If you don't remember that, a lot. All right, and 1,800 pounds is nowhere near that. You're not even putting a dent. No one even notices that. Usually, you can't go outside that zone. Remember mercantilism? But they were allowing a little bit, and if you did, you had to pay a tax on it. So if you imported something from the French West Indies, usually molasses and rum, big surprise there. All right, you can do that, but it's 6 pennies a gallon. All right, so usually you bribe the harbor master 1.5 pennies. All right, and so maybe he doesn't see it come by. So they decide maybe we'll lower the tax to 3. And here come the writs of assistance. Now people start showing up at the custom house in New York or Boston or Philly or Charleston someplace. I want to look at the documents. We stop the ships. We start searching the ships. And they're not exactly the nicest people looking at this stuff. And they're going through everything, making sure that you aren't a smuggler. And they will confiscate stuff because they got the writ of assistance. You can see where this is going. So eventually they decide, why don't we just lower the tax down to a penny, which is actually less than the bribe. So you pay a penny and you don't have to worry about this stuff. It's bringing in about 30,000 pounds. How's that helping against that 132 million again? Yeah, it's not. All right, and the ports and the colonies that get affected the most are going to be Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, because that's where most of the shipping is coming from. Down south is still mainly agriculture, and let's face it, if you want to smuggle something in down there, it's a little easier, a lot more coves and other places you can hide stuff. All right, the Sugar Act was annoying. The Stamp Act really set everybody off in 1765. Now, they need tax money. They're taxing the people in Great Britain 26 shillings a person. In the colony, they only get taxed between half a shilling and one and a half, which is much lower. They figured if they taxed the British people anymore back in Great Britain, there's going to be some kind of revolt. So let's tax the colonies, which, oh, that won't lead to a revolt, will it? And this is really bad because it's a tax on paper and stamps. Okay, everything, man. I mean, newspaper, got a tax. Write a letter, got a tax. Put an envelope made of paper, got a tax. Put the stamp on it, got a tax. Write a petition to King George protesting this. Guess what? It's on paper, tax. Envelope, tax. Stamp, tax. All right, everything. Playing cards, that was the big thing. No Xbox yet, right? So, they're playing cards on a Friday night, tax on those too. I mean, everything's taxed. That brings in between 60,000 to 100,000 pounds, which is only 12 to 20% of North American operations. That's not really putting a dent in 132 million pounds, is it? And it's really starting to upset people. James Otis and Patrick Henry. You remember these guys? Taxation without representation. Now they're upset because Parliament is imposing these taxes on the colony, and I don't remember voting for anybody in Parliament, do you? No, I don't remember. I figure if I'm going to get taxed, my own idiots can do it. I don't need somebody over in London to do it. So people are starting to get upset. And Boston is getting hurt worse than anyone else. That's the biggest port at the time. New York and Philly are on the way, not there yet. But Boston gets hurt worse. And what a surprise, that's where the revolution is going to break out. So it's really starting to happen in Boston. What's this all about is not really about Britain trying to impose control like James II. It's really about money. If they could have found a way to do it without raising taxes, the British would have always been happy to keep the colonies running the way it is. But if you live over here in the Americas and suddenly they're imposing taxes and people are searching ships, waving around their writs of assistance, this is your view of the whole thing. Okay? You just see the British waving this thing, hitting you with it, looking for money. And believe me, it's not going to last very long before somebody grabs this thing out of Stewie's hands and hits him back with it. And the protests are starting. We got the Loyal Nine. We got the Sons of Liberty. It's small kind of acts of vandalism at first, but it's going to escalate. Grab a little drink there. Now, Andrew Oliver is a tax collector in charge of picking this stuff up over in Boston. He has to collect all the money. So they got tired of it and they went after his house. Yeah, they burned it down. And then they went after Chief Justice Thomas Hutchinson's house because his brother-in-law. Here's the irony. Hutchinson hated the Stamp Act. He was trying to get it repealed and they went after his house. Hey, when the mob takes over, man, anything can happen. So now the protests are starting and we're starting to see some violence. But Britain still needs the money, man. They still need the money. Chancellor of the Exchequer, that's a fancy way of saying treasurer, Charles Townshend. I gotta find the money. Here comes the Quartering Act of 1766. If you guys are gonna get violent, they send British troops to make sure this doesn't happen. These British troops, they gotta pay for the barracks. They gotta live somewhere, right? New York says, no, we're not gonna let this happen. So they suspend everything New York's government in 1767. British military is now running New York. The Townshend Acts, they got more taxes. Taxes on glass. Oh, great. So I can't even go to the bar to complain without having to pay for the drink I'm drinking it out of. Lead. Lead, you need that for paint, right? You don't get the cheap paint, get the nice paint. Oh, by the way, now we're going to tax paint. So now I can't even use the cheap paint. Paper, we already know about that. They're taxing more paper. How much more paper can you tax, man? And here we go, tea, taxing our tea. Oh my goodness. So I can't get the booze at the bar because it comes in a glass. I got to get tea, and that's going to get taxed as well. And that comes in a cup, so that gets taxed. Lead, use that for paint. Try to get away from the expensive, and now we got it on cheap paint and you still can't escape it. Paper, can't escape the taxes. They're everywhere. They expected to bring in 37,000 pounds if everything worked the way it was supposed to, which isn't going to put a dent in that 132 million pound debt. Only end up bringing in 20,000. So you've upset everybody. You would make a minuscule amount even if it did work, and it doesn't work, and you've upset everybody for 20,000 pounds. Really need to rethink this approach, Great Britain. So that's the first part of the revolution. We got some more coming up, and you can see it is heading for something very, very bad. American Revolution Part 2 coming up.